Good morning to you and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Friday morning and welcome to nearly the weekend. Great to see you this morning and thank you for joining us for today. May I remind you, don't forget to push the share button at the bottom of this message or like it or comment on it or something. That way lots of other people can hear the messages too. Anyway, friends, it's nearly the weekend. Do come and join us at church. We'd love to see you, whether it's online or whether it's face-to-face. We'd love to see you. And a new development for those of you watching in Tamworth. St Andrew's Kettlebrook now have their service at 5:30 on a Saturday. So if ever getting to church is difficult for you, for whatever reason it may be, maybe you want to visit your grandchildren or football or whatever you want to do, you can go to church Saturday night, 5:30 at St Andrew's Kettlebrook. That's Cross Street in Tamworth, and you can park at the Working Men's Club as well if parking's tricky. Anyway, friends, we are at the we're on the 19th chapter of the Gospel of John. Just to remind you where we were at yesterday, it's Good Friday. Jesus has been tried by the high priest, and he's been tried by Pontius Pilate. And at the end, really, of enormous pressure from a crowd baying for Jesus' blood, despite offering them a bandit in substitute. In the end, Pilate gives way, and Jesus is condemned condemned to be crucified. And so that's where we pick it up from this morning. It's John's Gospel, chapter 19. I'm starting to read at verse 16. Then he, Pilate, handed Jesus over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him with two others, one on either side, with Jesus between them. Pilate also had an inscription written and put on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this inscription because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, in Latin, and in Greek. And the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but this man said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his clothes and divided them into 4 parts, one for each soldier. They also took his tunic. Now the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from the top. So they said to one another, "Let's not tear it, but let's cast lots for it to see who will get it." This was to fulfill what the scripture says. They divided my clothes among themselves. For my clothing they cast lots. And that's what the soldiers did. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, Jesus is taken out to be crucified. It wasn't very far either. It's probably about 400 yards. I've been there. It's about 400 yards uphill, taken just outside the city to what is essentially a local rubbish dump, a place called Golgotha. And despite what the hymn says, it wasn't on a hill, but it was just outside the city. But it was just outside, without, so to speak, the city wall, and that's where it happened. And John doesn't give us great descriptions of crucifixion. If you want to hear more about that, a very good place to look is Psalm 22, if you want to know what it's like to be crucified. And I don't really want to do things just to be cornflakes, to be honest. But essentially, crucifixion involves being, you carry the crossbar out with you, that the person would, and they would be essentially nailed, hand and feet, to a cross, and they'd be left to hang there. And people could hang there for, let's be honest, for days, apparently. There were even stories about people coming down and escaping and all sorts of stuff, but people could hang. It was long, it was painful, and everything else. It wasn't just that, it was also shameful. I've never yet seen, I'm glad really, an accurate picture of it, because it was done in the nude. It was done deliberately shameful, so people would you were there literally for all to see. There's nothing you could do about it. It involved excruciating pain. It was probably the most unpleasant method of death that human beings have ever considered to do to each other. It was so brutal that the Romans themselves outlawed it in 315 AD, which is absolutely horrible. So I say it was painful, it was long, it was drawn out. It was shameful. The other thing that's worth commenting about, which St. Paul later on really had to agonize with, is that it was also, it involved a curse as well. It says in the Old Testament, I forget where, cursed is he who hangs on a tree. So Jesus, when he was on the cross, he took that curse for us. So there was also a religious curse involved also in this method of crucifixion, because he was hanging on a tree. So for all that reasons, Jesus, that's what he endured. And like I said, I'm not saying this to try and make you spit on your cornflakes or anything like that. I mean, I guess what I'm telling you so that really just to sort of be in awe and in wonder and just say thank you, really, because he did it for you and he did it for me. So let's, as I say, without going too much to the gore, let's just think about, and let's just, with such a view as to say, Lord, thank you for what you did for me. And just be aware of what he did. Second thing, there's another. Yesterday we talked about the ironies of the whole thing, and that in those days when you were crucified, when someone was crucified, they used to hang there used to be a sign put on, say what this person had done. And Pilate, of course, has his last bit of defiance against the high priest, and he puts the King of the Jews, and that's what in 3 languages, so there was no escape about it. And of course, the religious authorities get very wound up about it. Oh, you shouldn't say that. You should say this man says he was the king of the Jews. But Pilate, for this point, says, what I've written. In other words, what I've written. In other words, that's what I've written. Get on with it. I've written what I've written. Tough. And he writes that. And isn't it ironic that the one person that did recognise the kingship of Jesus, if you like, was Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor? I think that's quite interesting. So Jesus was the real king. But let's remember that the same person who hangs on this cross is the same person that turned water into wine. The person who proved he was God by his amazing signs and wonders earlier in the gospel. This is the same king hanging on the cross now. And it's important that we remember, this isn't just a person being crucified. This is the King of Kings being crucified. This is God on the cross here. And it's important we remember that. So that's the second thing. So firstly, we've got just what Jesus did for you and for me. He took the curse for us. Secondly, that he is the real king, and it's the king who's crucified here, and not just another person. Thirdly, Jesus says at the end, it is finished. In other words, he gets to the end and he realizes his work is done. He's accomplished what he came to achieve. Esse missa est, from which people get the word mass, remembering that. That Jesus says it is finished, that his work is done. He did what he came to earth to do. He did what God had called him to do, and his work is now finished. But then finally, there's this lovely little bit at the end about the disciple whom Jesus loved and Mary, who were there watching. And even from the cross, Jesus, even at the point of his near to death, he has compassion on his mother, who realizes he's now going to be sonless, if you like. He could lose, and also John, this disciple who Jesus loved. But so he has compassion, and he says, mother, your son, your mother, and so on. But I think this is quite interesting, because the disciple who Jesus loved is John's code for talking about himself. And I think it's quite interesting, really, because I think we tend to think of the Gospels as the story about Jesus, what Jesus said and what Jesus did. This is his story, you might say. And the Gospel is telling the story of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. But what I think is quite interesting here is at this point, John I think he's also saying, this story is about me. So he's not just telling the story about Jesus. I think he's also saying, this is my story too. And I think for us, really, we need to kind of remember also, when you read the story of Jesus here, this isn't just the story of what a man did, or even the Son of God did all those years ago. It's also the story for us too. This is us. We are caught up in this, in him as our hope. All my hope on God is founded, as the hymn says. And actually, by Jesus doing what he did, this is our hope. So this isn't, as John's kind of saying here, this isn't just the story about Jesus. This is actually quite autobiographical as well. This is also the story about us. This was our hope. Jesus won our hope. It isn't just about him, it's actually about us too. And John is saying here, this is my story. And I think for all of us, we can look at this also and say, this is my story too. Jesus did it for you and for me. And all my hope on God, on this, is founded. So, 4 things briefly in this amazing reading this morning. And as I say, do reflect on it and meditate on it at your leisure. Firstly, what Jesus did for you and for me by being crucified, the shame, the pain, the curse, everything. He did it for you and for me. So just reflect on that and just say thank you. Secondly, that this isn't just, as the sign on the cross said, this isn't just another man being crucified. This isn't just the death of a bloke. This is the death of the King, the King of Kings on a cross here. Not just another person. This is the King of Kings here. Thirdly, Jesus said, the point just before he died, it is finished. He accomplished everything that he came to do. But finally, let's also, when you hear the story this morning, this isn't just the story about Jesus. I think this is also our story too. This is our story. This is our song too. God bless you. Have a lovely weekend. Love to see you at church if you're free. Great to see you. God bless you and have a lovely